Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming back. Now it's after the lunch session. I want you to be, thinking and up and doing and concentrating. Ron Lichty is, I'd like to say, a friend of mine. I've known Ron for many years, since I worked at Schwab back in 1996, I think it was. Anyway, Ron is a great person. He's not going to tell you this, but he raises lots of money for charity. And he's just an all-around good guy. And he's published a book that he's going to tell you about. I'll hand over to Ron. So, Ron Lichty.
So, I'm Ron Lichty. I am a software development management repeat offender. And I'm going to ask you whether you're repeat offenders with me in a minute. I was originally a programmer. I have a couple of patents to my name and wrote a couple of books on programming before I wrote one on software development management. After being a programmer for about 8 years, went to Apple, where I opted to manage a product development group for development tools, highly technical product management. I went to the dark side. I came back. After 2 years, I became a programmer again, but they kept making me a manager at Apple. And I finally accepted my fate. I have, as a manager since Apple, focused on untangling the knots in software development and making software development problems. For about the last 10 years, I've alternated between being a VP or Director of Development or CTO and consulting with organizations in untangling the knots in software development, occasionally weaving in a little bit of Agile training. I was involved with XP first in 1999 when I was at Schwab. I heard about Scrum for the first time in 2001 and said, wow, this is cool. And have been a fan ever since from a developer's standpoint. It's that being able to put my head down and not be interrupted for a period of time and then bring my head up and let business development do whatever they want to do, 180 degrees or 2 degrees off of where we were going. It's just fine because we just delivered. So that's part of what I like about Scrum. Now, I want to ask you about all of you. So, for all of you who are now or have ever managed programmers, would you stand up?
You mean as a HR manager or any kind of manager?
Did you write a review?
No.
Of a programmer? Okay, so if you've written reviews of programmers, if you manage programmers, so this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 people in the room. So for all of you who have had a day or more of training in managing programmers, stay standing. Holy moly. We're down to 3 people standing. So the next question was, did you get your training before you became a manager? That just went to 0, 20 to 3 to 0. So I want to point out how much training we expect programmers to have in programming and how little we expect managers to have in managing. This is a hard thing. And it's one of the reasons that my co-author and I, about 9 years ago, started writing this book. It came out last year. It took us 8 years in our spare time to write it. I swore that I would not do what I did with those programming books where I had a 6-month deadline to write 600 pages on assembly language at the time. Neither of us had training in management. Both of us were lucky enough to go to companies large enough to give us some training in management along the way. So we were among the 3 people who had some training in management, but we didn't have it before we started. And in fact, there are very few books in managing programmers. There are a ton of books on project management. There are a ton of books on Scrum and XP and Agile, and there are a ton of books on general management, but there's very little on managing the unique set of us who are programmers.
Great book, by the way. Encompasses all the common sense you'll never see.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pay you afterwards. So, and that, and the fact that my co-author and I were looking for a place to house the 300 or so rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom that we had been collecting. And so that's the, this is, by the way, the book, and the what's been called the creamy center section, although it's printed on halftone, is 300, about 80 pages, 300 rules of thumb. And I'm mentioning that because I'm going to scatter a few of them through this talk. So here we are at AgileCamp. Why do we need to talk about management? So how many people have been in a Scrum training where they draw the circle and explain the size of the team and who's in the team and all that stuff, right? So you got the big team with the capital T, you got the small team with the small t, it's got well, they don't name them here, but we also have a Scrum Master, and we have a product owner, and we have a business owner, and we have stakeholders, and where's the manager? So, same deal. Here's another version of that drawing. We actually call out testers and developers, technical writer, architect, tech lead, UI designer, product owner, Scrum Master. Where's the manager? The managers are left with their hands in their pockets or scratching their heads trying to figure out what their role is, which is, and with little or no training. So what should managers do? We're going to try something called Agile programming. That means no more planning and no more documentation. Just start write coding. And I'm glad it has a name. That was your training. Yeah. So we end up as managers, we end up feeling the Agile manager squeeze. We end up with all this pressure coming in on us. But the fundamental reason that we want to talk about Agile is that managers have a critical role to play in Agile transformations and in Agile itself. So here's a quote from Mike Cohn, who's saying, a common misconception is that because of this reliance on self-organizing teams, there's little or no role for leaders of Agile teams. Nothing could be further from the truth. So there are roles that your team still needs you to play. There are pre-Agile roles and styles that are inappropriate. There are roles that you may have had before Agile that are deprecated. There are roles that change, sometimes dramatically, and there are roles that are new. But it's subtle. So here's the 9 chapters that we wrote around that creamy center section. Why we programmers are hard to manage. So the interesting thing is all of these are still true. Managers still need to know all of these things, but there are nuanced differences, and so we're going to get to those. But what is unique about us as programmers? How do we understand who programmers are uniquely different from other parts of the company, but also from each other? How do you recruit, interview, and hire great programmers? These are all jobs we have to do. Getting new programmers started off right, ensuring that between giving somebody an offer and their first day, they actually show up on their first day. Anybody who's a programmer between hiring and the first day? Managing your team, managing your boss, managing your peers, a huge challenge of managing yourself. Motivating, what motivates programmers and programming teams to greatness? How do you establish a programming culture that supports a programming environment of excellence? Jorgen was talking about culture earlier, and it had culture right at the center. That's exactly where it belongs. But none of us get trained in culture and the critical role that the culture plays. And then finally, down at the bottom, the last thing is actually writing and delivering software. So these are 6 areas that I'm going to talk about over the next 35 minutes. Mostly because they change, but in some cases because they stay the same. So creating an Agile culture. So managing software development is finally catching up with this guy McGregor, who wrote the XY theory in the 1950s. And said there are 2 ways that you can manage people. You can manage them from the top down, tell them what to do, be authoritarian, Or you can manage from the top up and recognize that your role is to support your staff. Agile is getting us to theory Y, finally. It's getting many of us to theory Y. Many of you who work in authoritarian companies know that it's not gotten all the way there. The crazy thing about software is this stuff was invented in the 1950s. And yet our companies run this way. They believe that that left side is the way to manage their software teams. We as managers need to support that management up structure. He uses words like enabling, empowering, developmental, and continuous improvement. And I think the Agile phrase that goes with this is servant leadership. So let's talk about servant leadership because it's about leading, not managing. So here's a quote from Alan Shalloway. Lean Agile management is the art of leading people, not managing them. Leading people involves creating the correct environment, focusing on the right things, trusting them to do their work. In Lead Agile, the manager has two primary responsibilities: setting the outcomes or goals expected of the team, and assisting the doers in creating a better process and workspace to get their jobs done. It's about creating the culture. It's about focusing attention. It's about trusting your people and your team. There's a rule of thumb that trust but verify. Who knows who said that?
One of our presidents, I believe.
Reagan. And who said it before Reagan?
General Patton?
No.
Vladimir Lenin.
Oh, Lenin.
Reagan never admitted it, but he was quoting Lenin. Trust but verify. Right? That's our job. Our job is to trust our people, to check and make sure that we're getting what we're asking for, but to trust them. And setting expected outcomes for teams, I got a great rule of thumb from Alan Lefkoff, who was president and CEO of Utopia for many years. He learned it from Lou Gerstner, who said, "I inspect what I expect." Really like that phrasing. So the thing about rules of thumb is that they are memorable, succinct, and capture what it is, in this case, what it is our jobs are. So we're improving the process and environment to support outstanding work. So in terms of creating an agile culture, we crafted it, and we believed that it was important enough that we devoted an entire chapter to establishing a successful programming culture. This is true whether you're doing Agile or whether you're not. The first thing you need to understand is what's your corporate culture? And what part of that is true? Part of it's real, not just words. And then with the words, what part of it can you leverage? They're often lofty words, and those are lofty words that to the extent they're repeated, and most of us see them on the corporate walls, so they are. Which ones of those can we repeat, can we leverage for our teams, and which ones of those do we need to shut out? Because they're written by salespeople and marketing people where success is an individual heroic act, not a team thing. Software development is a team sport. And so we need to craft our own culture within sometimes very sales-oriented, very top-down, very heroic effort-oriented cultures that supports our teams and our teams can be successful and live with. So that's creating an agile culture. I want to talk about supporting agile values. So I want to say first, waterfall is not particularly successful, but it is straightforward. As Jorgen said this morning, they've got a PMBOK. There's a bunch of rules. There's a bunch of practices that all you need to do is follow. They've got phase gates, for God's sake. I joined the authorship team this year of the study of product team performance. This is the second year of the study. Last year's author group, in surveying thousands of people in product organizations, asked the question: what is your does your team use Agile, or does it use a blended methodology, or does it use Lean, or does it use Waterfall? And so we kind of took a census. This year we asked one additional question. We asked that we did the census, and the census is interesting and it's changing. It's sort of what you would expect. But we asked this additional question to say, of those methods, which of those do you think is likely to lead to higher profitability for your product? I don't know that you can see the light blue here, but the Agile people said Agile well. The blended people said blended well. The Lean people said Lean well. The Waterfall people said, give me anything but Waterfall. It was astonishing. It was astonishing because we know that there are executives in some of our companies who think Waterfall works, but nobody on teams does. The people who work on Waterfall teams know it doesn't work. That's astonishing stuff. You can get a free copy of this, by the way. Go to I've got my blog, URL at the end, and I've been blogging about it, and it's got the URLs to where you can go get the study. So while we know that Waterfall is nearly impossible, while people on Waterfall teams know that Waterfall is nearly impossible, that doesn't make Agile easy. In fact, Agile is hard. Waterfall is easy because it has the PMBOK and because it has all those practices. And the Agile Manifesto gives us a set of values. And whether it's because we're so used to Waterfall and practices in the PMBOK, or whether it's because as human beings we latch on to concrete things like practices, we tend to lose track of the values and latch on to those practices. And the result of that, so I've gone into, I can't tell you how many companies I've gone into and said, so are you, and they say, yeah, we're Agile. I said, okay, tell me about that. And they say, well, we do stand-ups every day. Tell me about that. Well, we don't stand up. And how long do they last? Well, they last about an hour. And you say there are 3 questions? Would you mind loaning me the questions so we could ask those at the next stand-up we have? There's not only do we latch onto practices instead of values, but our decades and centuries of waterfall thinking lead us to erode the very practices that we latch onto. And that's it's one of the key roles that that managers have is we have the opportunity to call our teams back to we need to value the values over the practices. And it's one of the key things that we as managers, roles that we play, is that red flag detection of how are our Agile transformations doing? How are our Agile teams doing? How's our Agile culture doing? Going to class doesn't make you educated. Doing the practices doesn't make you Agile. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian. Going to synagogue doesn't make you Jewish. It helps you to get there. Those practices and rituals and ceremonies are set up to help us be better at this stuff. But it's about the spirit. Jorgen was talking about the mindset. It's about the mindset of Agile, not the practices. You talk about empowering self-organization and excellence. Empowering teams and empowering excellence have always been our job. It's just that we've been so busy running teams that we haven't had time to actually lead them and empower them. Frankly, I think most of you probably recognize this as something that that we've always had as a role, being damper to the noise. There is a torrent of politics, of opportunities that our companies give us and our teams to distract us from the focus that delivers great products that have always been a threat to our teams. But, that have always sapped our team's focus. But when we transform ourselves to Agile in organizations that don't entirely change around us, it's even more challenging, and we have to dampen the noise even more. So our organizations mostly think Agile is a development thing. You developers or you product team, you go be Agile. We'll keep being who we are. We'll keep telling you what to do. I was working in one company in which was being micromanaged from 6,000 miles away by senior management. But we were supposed to be Agile. Doesn't work very well. And we have to figure out as managers how to dampen the noise, because there's a heck of a lot of noise to dampen. So HR wants to review our people as individuals, not as teams. In lean times, we see executives proposing haircuts to every team in the company. The well-functioning teams, the non-well-functioning teams, it's bad craziness. In good times, they reward heroism. The programmer who comes in at the last moment and saves the day. What does that do for the people who've been working week after week after week to make sure? What does it do to Rich's team that works 40 hours a week and then goes home and rests for the evening and for the weekend? What does that do to them? When you come in and reward the guy, the Lone Ranger who comes and saves the day, and disregard the destructive force that focusing on individuals has on teams. And as managers, we need to be aware. So this is one of several charts we've got in our book that takes Hertzberg into the programming world. Hertzberg's a guy who in the 50s or 60s realized that the things that motivate people and the things that demotivate people are different. So what demotivates? So I'll name a couple of things that demotivate people. Working conditions, the red ones. Working condition, company policies and administration. How many people are motivated by company policies and administration? Not motivated, but it's a hell of a demotivator. You know, there's an HR maxim that you don't leave companies, you leave managers. If you're a bad manager, you're out of there. You're looking for another job. It sucks working for a bad manager. So the things, and what motivates people, the opportunity to make a difference in the world. Rich was talking about that this morning. Number one, we think, for programmers, for why all of us got into this business, into this product crazy software business, is making a difference in the world. How do we enable our folks, our teams, to connect their values to what it is that we're building, connect to the change that they can make in the world? Huge opportunity for managers. And then there's removing impediments. Here's a quote from Diana Larson, who's the co-author of Agile Retrospectives. Managers are still needed, not so much for their planning and controlling ability, but for the important job of interfacing on the team's behalf with the rest of the organization. So if you go back to that circle with those people in it that doesn't have a manager anywhere near it, the Scrum Master is the one who's supposed to remove impediments, right? We all learned that in Scrum class. Right? But who has more clout in the organization? Generally not Scrum Masters. Maybe in Rich's organization, maybe in a couple of yours, but not very many. Mostly, there's a management hierarchy, and we as managers have more ability to interface with the rest of the organization. We can make more difference, and we can remove some of the bigger impediments, particularly ones of those that move up and down the management chain and across to our peer organizations, than anybody else. It's a critical role for managers to play. And I'll give you one other example of removing impediments, which is Slack. I love this drawing. which of those two streets are you more, is Domino's Pizza more likely to get a pizza delivery through on? The one with Slack or the one without, at 100% capacity that's not moving? Right? So we need to understand things like Slack. We need to understand that the goal of our organizations, despite what all the rest of management around us tells us, the goal of our organizations is to deliver value to customers, not to ensure that everybody's working all the time. Isn't that silly? It's like, oh, is everybody working all the time? On what? Who cares? Are we delivering value to our customers? Are we helping our companies make money? As Jorgen put it in this room last hour. Great measure. Capacity, and 100% capacity is not a great measure. Counseling, coaching, and mentoring. So this is interesting. It's a core element of our jobs all along, right? Shouldn't change very much. So I did this interesting exercise. I almost brought it here, and I didn't because we just don't have enough time. It's an exercise in which and you'll understand why in a minute, because there's about 50 lines of all of the roles and responsibilities that we as managers have. You know, there's relative to our people, our peers, our bosses, our jobs, our projects, all that stuff. And the exercise was, when you change to Agile, how much does this particular one change? And I thought, counseling, coaching, and mentoring doesn't change. It's what we should be doing all along. Interesting thing is, half the room said that one changes the most, because suddenly I've got enough time to go do it. I've never had time to counsel and coach and mentor my people. Now that I'm not responsible for micromanaging a waterfall project, I can actually talk to my people about their careers, about where they're going, about what they want to achieve, about what they want to get out of working here. And so it's one of the ones that managers thought would change the most. Finally, resource management. Now, I want to say this is by far not a comprehensive list, but I picked these 6 because I think these are 6 that managers truly make a difference and can make a difference in the Agile transformation. And resource management is one that is a constant, whether we're doing Agile or not. It's recruiting, finding, interviewing, hiring great people. And even when we don't have recs, always be recruiting. This act, and I attributed it to Mickey and me, but we think that this is the most important rule of thumb in our whole book. Because if you are successful, the rest of your job is easy. And if you are unsuccessful at one hire, and I made a list, that person can be a plague on your team for months. They can demotivate your team. They can demoralize your organization. They can undermine your leadership. They can incite dissension and strife. They can delay or derail your deliverables, not to mention how hard it is to get rid of bad hires. Anybody had that experience? I was feeling pretty smug about my hiring ability through about 4 companies, and then, oh darn. Yeah, I've had that experience. We're not always going to be perfect. I'd like to think that I could have been perfect, and had I not screwed up, I would have been. But I get fooled, and we all do. And the job is to always be recruiting, to have the candidates ready at the point at which the hiring window opens, because it opens and slams shut in our organizations really quickly. And then secondly, to deal with problem employees. To the extent that anybody gets any training in dealing with problem employees, it's us. Our teams know who the problem employees are, They know it's our responsibility, and they look at us and say, "You're not dealing with it. Either you're a dodo, you're a really bad, poorly informed, out of it manager, or you're incapable of doing your job." That has to be dealt with. Because for all those reasons I named. So,
And the messages it sends to the rest of your staff if you keep it.
yep. So managers in Agile, critical to Agile transformational success. Key roles in Agile. So engage your managers and clarify your managerial roles. Get an organizational understanding of how critical this role is. And your own understanding of how and where to focus. All right, questions. So, Bernie, I got 12 minutes.
Yeah, I'll facilitate. Sorry?
Right here.
Oh, quick announcement from Stacy.
Just 30 seconds of your time, please. So my name's Stacy. I wanted to show you guys a little book. This is a little book. See all that? It's a book that Rich brought. In fact, there's 4 others like this, and a few of them are missing. Someone had inadvertently put this on a table during lunchtime, and so if you've seen one of these, could you hand them back to someone at the front desk to make sure they get back to you? Because Rich actually intended to have these given away as part of a raffle thing. So it's a really good book. So,
You were too agile.
so if you guys have seen this or one like it, it'd be great if we could get it back, and then hopefully you can win it back. But anyway,
right,
thanks guys.
Stacy.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, no problem.
All right, first question's right here.
So in a large organization where there are multiple teams, each interdependent on each other, how do you, what are your thoughts on teams that are at different speed in terms of agility, or one could be agile, one could not be? In my company, the classic example is if I need an environment, it takes me anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months before I can do anything. Right? Whereas my software team has to be productive tomorrow or next sprint at least.
Right.
What can you share?
So that other team that's giving you a 6-month deadline, and I've seen that in some organizations, that's not an agile versus not agile problem. That's a problem. Problem probably with their management, and within a company. Well, you leave.
I wish.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go back to your original question though, which is. So I was doing a training last week. This is actually really interesting. When I was doing a training in the city last week, it was several teams, and we were talking about their sprint length. So their sprint length was 1 week, and one group from one team said, "Yeah, it's perfect. All of the JIRA tickets we get fit within a week, just absolutely perfect." The other team said, "Hardly any of our tickets fit within 1 week." The outcome of that was one team's going to keep a week and one team's going to go to 2 weeks. Now they need to align, right? I mean, this is whether you do it as a scrum of scrums or you do some kind of Spotify arrangement, or you do however your global communication happens. However, the managers or the scrum masters or the tech leads talk to each other, they need to align their deliverables because they have mutual dependencies and they need to be talking to each other. So if there is one characteristic that, short of it being a management problem, which I suspect it is in your case, but the one characteristic that makes a difference across organizations, whether you've got one team or whether you've got 5 teams or whether you've got 18 teams, is communication. Untangling the knots in software development, the biggest knot is communication, and everybody heard the joke about the difference between an introverted and extroverted developer. The extroverted developer looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. So I should note that I was one of those developers when I came out of high school. I was as shy a guy as you could find. And I know that startles a whole bunch of people these days. Internally, inside myself, it doesn't startle me because I know that really I'm a shy guy. We tend as developers not to communicate enough. It's by nature, our productivity is tied to our ability to climb into the microprocessor and listen to the gates open and close. It is not tied to communicating, but our productivity as teams, and even more so as multiple teams, is tied to communication. Communication between us, between teams, pairing to our partner organizations across the board. Okay. Come on.
So where I'm coming from is a very similar type of challenge where managers don't know what to do in the Agile world. What are the first steps that we need to take towards moving up to this sort of a model offering?
And could you repeat the question out loud?
Yeah, so what's this? So Kamal's basically saying this is not uncommon. Or how do you move toward Agile and incorporate managers? And I think the first thing, I was in a workshop this morning that trying to think of the name of the guy from Cisco who was giving it.
Jeff Marr.
Jeff Marr, yeah, and he was saying, think about it from each of the individuals that you're trying to partner with. Most of them aren't in that circle. Development managers aren't in that circle, and the first thing to do is to communicate to them what an important role they have relative to the success of this transformation or the success of Agile in general. Once we're through the transformation, although I haven't seen a lot of organizations through it. And Rich or Joe, or one of the talks this morning was talking about the fact that that this is a process, it's a mindset, it's an ongoing change. It's not an end state. In fact, it's one of the anti-patterns is to think that we've got an end state. So the first thing is to bring them in and recognize their role and give them these 6 things as critical roles. These 6 and think through the rest. But critical roles to being part of the transformation.
Is this something that the senior execs in the company need to be communicating downwards, or is it something that the HR should help with? Who supports this conversation?
I think any of those people could support this conversation. Jorgen called out needing executive sponsorship, and that's inordinately helpful. Executives who have thought about it are often bought in. And developers are often bought in if they've thought about it, because they get to go heads down for sprint lengths and not whiplash every day as business development comes in with a different idea of how things ought to be done. But it's that middle layer where, what do we do? How do we do this? And really, Agile transformations ought to engage all of our companies, not just our product groups. Now I haven't got a global answer to that, but because it depends on the organization, the culture, the people, and who's in HR and who's in, but all of those places.
I'm wondering how you address the Peter principle, basically, the people being promoted. I think there are leaders in management positions, but I also think there are managers in leader positions, if that makes sense. And there are some managers that don't want to let go of the command and control aspect because that's what they think being a manager is. Is there hope for those people? Do you know what I mean? Is it something that they can be transformed, or is it just like, look, we just need to change them out with people who think about it differently?
It depends on their willingness to change. And I think it depends, so the question is managers who've been promoted to leadership positions who want to micromanage. And can they be changed? And sometimes, and so it depends on their management, whether their management is in part it depends on that, right? I mean, they're getting reviews. They're getting reviewed. Does their management believe in this change? Or does their management want to micromanage from 6,000 miles away? The company I worked for a few years ago wanted to do. There are so many different, I mean, I don't want to write off people in positions and say, well, they can't learn. The real excuse me, the real point of Agile, well, one of the major points of Agile for me is making ourselves learning organizations. And you know, you have a culture that supports being a learning organization, and that hopes to turn on that learning switch that those people have turned off. Okay. Bernie.
So to that comment, we're struggling with that now. One of the things, when you said where's the manager in the team, we're trying to break the idea that a team has a manager. So there's a product owner who's responsible for saying what the team has to do, prioritizing it. The management of the people within the team, we're putting into practice leads or functional managers, as they call them. I don't like the term so much. But there's no one person managing the whole team, because otherwise the team can be intimidated by that manager. So this takes out the command and control attitude of you've got to do this and you've got to do this and you've got to do this, and it puts them exactly in Ron's place of the learning mentality, because now they can still manage. They can micromanage the knowledge, right? So they can say, I've got to grow this aspect of knowledge in the company, and they can go to town on that, right? And they can also manage staff to learn. So, and that way they're not messing with what the team is doing in terms of their sprints. They're messing with what they're doing in terms of their knowledge acquisition, which isn't so bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what we're doing to take them, so you don't have this manager of a team mentality in most cases, but you've still got people that don't want to play.
All right, I have a copy. So I think I have time for one more question.
Here, you touched on the problem of managers being asked to rate individuals and how that plays into sort of team performance. You covered that in your book, sort of the conflict that's creating as teams are transforming.
We cover so much that I'm not sure that we cover it to the depth that you're asking your question. It's
Peter, one more in the back.
Challenging problem that requires a change in mindset for all of us as managers. Because we need to be thinking in terms of results and results of teams. And so we talk about
Just give it to Peter here. Peter? Oh no. Are you going to put your sticky in for the drawing?
Oh, I got it. Sorry.
Because what you measure,
Here
you
it
will
comes.
get. And
Good
it's
job.
not always what you thought you were going to get. The side effects of measuring things are really interesting.